Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel where the Doge reads you stories for about 20 minutes. Role-playing is a great way to let your creative juices flow, and just relax and weave a story together with your friends. Fantasies of fighting monsters and dragons, of exploring the unknown and defying the odds can be a great escape from the mundanes of life. Though some people out there will try to use this great hobby in order to try and live out their less wholesome fantasies, much to the detriment of everyone else at the table, much like the subjects in these next D&D horror stories. But first, if you like what I do on this channel, liking, commenting, and sharing the video really helps me out, and I really appreciate it when you do. I can't respond to all of them, but I do read all the comments, and they really do help give me the push to keep creating content. But with that out of the way, let's hop right into these stories. Player rips off an anime character and believes being slapstick will have no consequences. By Reddit user RiseOSD. So, after setting up a new group, I found myself with a fair bit of downtime, so I decided to run a few one-shots with people who didn't apply before the group filled up to pass the time and get some new ideas. One of them sends me this concept. Player. Alright, so this guy was in an academy for a while and was kind of a loser. His friends were losers and no one else liked him, until another girl from another town took interest in him and asked him out. It turns out she worked for another organization who wished to purge his bloodline, and she almost killed him. But as he lay dying, another girl from the academy came to him and made him an offer. She was a truly powerful demon and wanted a patron. While I think this backstory is semi-interesting, it doesn't take much Googling to realize this is basically the same plot as High School DxD. I sighed, but was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Either he'd be an actually decent player with a bad first impression, or I'd have a funny story to tell. Since I'm here, I think we can guess how it went. Session 0 comes around, and the party does their cliché, they meet in a tavern, song and dance. Since I'm a bit tropey myself, I'll be honest. I'll usually use these as a way to introduce the hometown and some important NPCs. Me. Alright, you've met up, and you're all sitting around the table. What do you want to do now? Player. Is there a bathhouse? Me. Yeah, you can see the doors leading to the baths at the back. Player. I want to peek in the women's baths. Oh boy, here we go. I've dealt with stuff like this occasionally, and can get people to knock it the fuck off, usually, by letting them know that actions have consequences, or they'll just rage quit when I don't give them what they want. Me. Okay, roll stealth. Player rolls, gets a 17. I roll perception, it's a 16. Me. Alright, there's two women lower in the hot springs, backs to the door. Player. Are they naked? Me. You can't tell, they're facing away and neck deep in the water. Player. I want to go inside and see for myself. I rolled. I cut him off. Me. As you open the door, it makes a decently loud creak. The women turn around, then quickly become shocked and cover themselves. One saying, "What are you doing? Get out before I tell my husband." The player, growing a bit frustrated. I run back to the table with my companions. The other players, still miraculously in character, start chewing him out for what they deem a stupid fucking move, when eventually, a broad-chested man enters, with one of the women in tow. Man. Are you the one disturbing the peace tonight? Player. Me? Man. No, the Tarrasque up there. Of course I mean you. The player, apparently still trying to prove he can get out of this, tried to throw a punch at the captain of the guard. He did not roll well on that, or the subsequent save against the grapple. Man. Spying on women bathing and attacking a member of the guard. You're under arrest under charges of disturbing the peace. I hear a subsequent disconnect from the player and start laughing hysterically. A fair chunk of the party apparently found this just as funny as I did. We finished up the session fine enough after that, and I check my DMs to find one last message from the player. Player. Fuck you, retard. Well, that player certainly seemed to be displaying typical that guy behavior. Luckily, OP seemed to be a pretty experienced DM, and allowed the player to dig his own grave essentially. Thankfully, OP and the other players were able to get a bit of a chuckle out of the whole situation. Have you ever experienced a player that didn't count on there being consequences for their actions? Let us all know in the comments. On to the next story. Weirdo throws a fit when his female character has to wear clothing. By Reddit user, Eagle Soaring. Early on in my online D&D career, I had this experience. It involves a real weirdo of a guy who I will name Spencer. Also involved in the story is a player in a short-lived game run by Spencer, who then started to run his own game with Spencer as a player that was also quite short-lived, who I will name Tori. This starts out with a few of us joining a Roll20 game that seemed pretty normal initially. I can't even remember the plot or anything, but it was a classic fantasy world. The first 2 red flags were when we joined the Discord, there was a dedicated Discord channel to homebrew mechanics, all of which detailed his homebrew mechanics of what happens if you lose in a fight. It basically boiled down to the enemies get to decide what they do with you. Example, kidnap, murder, blah blah. And if you were playing a female character, there was a high likelihood you'd be raped. We were like, okay, weird. But we were early in our online D&D careers, so we were like, this is probably fine. At least we get to play D&D. The second red flag came shortly after, where he was talking about the available races and some of the homebrew races he had in this world, and started posting examples of what they looked like in his world. They were all furry porn. Now, I don't have anything expressly against furries, but this, coupled with the above mentioned red flag, was enough to make me and Tori go, what? This campaign died after like 2 sessions, and Tori was like, quote, hey, I want to try my hand at running my own game, and invited everyone from the previously short-lived campaign, including Spencer. Big mistake. It started out with Spencer creating a Kitsune Girl archaeologist type character, who was also apparently an outlander and, quote, lived outside of civilized society and doesn't understand civilized customs. This doesn't understand civilized customs manifested as his character actively refusing to wear clothing in most situations. So he was playing this attractive Kitsune girl that just walked around stark naked. When we would go to sleep, he would always be like, quote, I find a high place to sleep completely naked under the moonlight to charge my power. Fucking weirdo. This culminated into a situation where we were investigating an imposter who was ruining the profits of the large guilds in town, and making large orders to the guilds, which caused the guilds to be stuck with the bills for the orders they didn't make. We tracked the imposter to a local bordello, and found that she was the mistress of it. It turns out that she was a changeling, and ended up escaping from us. We were then asked to brief the leader of the city guard, and what was happening, and when we went to the city hall, where her office was, she refused to sit down with us until Spencer's character got dressed, as we were in the official city hall, and there's decorum that must be followed. Plus, it's just fucking weird to walk around town completely naked. Spencer proceeded to throw a huge fit, accusing the DM of being a bad DM and, quote, ruining the fun of the game. Spencer then proceeds to pout for the rest of the session, and afterwards announces he's leaving the game because he, quote, can't in good conscience play in a game with such a dominating DM who is dedicated to ruining the fun and controlling his players. Edit. Completely forgot to add this part that shows how much more of a sus dude this guy is. Apparently one of the other players contacted me after all the shit went down, and told me that Spencer was running a new game, riddled with microtransactions. Like, straight up, pay me $20 to start with a legendary sword kind of shit. So yeah, the dude was sus in more ways than one. Edit 2. Since I've seen a couple of people trying to go, quote, this is your fault, you knew what you were getting into. These were 2 separate campaigns. The first one was run by Spencer, and I mentioned it to give context to how much of a pervy creep he is. The second campaign was run by Tori, a newbie DM, with Spencer as a player, and he plays the nudist fox girl. Some people ask, quote, "Why would you play in this game?" Well, this was when I was still in my first year of really playing D&D online, so I naively thought, in regards to the first game, quote, "That's weird and creepy, but how bad could it really be? None of us are playing female characters anyways." We were new players and didn't really have the confidence to air out our grievances with the quote-unquote experienced DM. And in regards to the second game, as I was still a newbie, I thought, how much damage could Spencer really do as a player? And Tori was a newbie DM, so they probably underestimated Spencer as well. Plus, when you're just starting out as a DM, it's a lot easier to invite people you've played with before than complete strangers. First, that homebrew rule of the enemies getting to decide what to do with your character if you lose a fight, up to and including rape, would be a hard no for me, dog. I would have disconnected from the game right then and there. Then for Spencer to essentially start sending everyone furry porn is pretty cringy as well. And then to basically act like a child and say that the DM in the second game was ruining D&D by requiring Spencer's character to wear clothes, when that would make sense in a freaking city hall, I would say that this is definitely a player that I would avoid at all cost. Plus, the microtransactions in Spencer's other game is just the cherry on top of this sundae of cringe. Let's get into the last story. DM makes creepy remarks and causes the whole party to leave. By Reddit user SageMage2. I apologize for the long story. Please sit back and relax, and let me tell you the story of how a man simping over me caused the whole party to leave. I, a 25-year-old female, was playing in a group with 4 other players, and at the time we were playing Curse of Strahd. I was playing a half-elven bard who was on the run after an abusive relationship had led me to the start of the journey with 5 adventurers in a bar. Our party consisted of a Fire Genasi Forge cleric, a Drow Ranger rough, a Lizard Folk warlock, a Dwarf barbarian, and my half-elf bard. The DM, a 39-year-old male, starts us off on a path going for Bavaria, where the first thing he throws at a level 3 party is 3 werewolves. Alright, it's pretty bad, but none of us thought anything of it. The DM allowed us to start with certain specialized silvered weapons to help fight off the more difficult encounters. Though they almost TPK'd the party, we somehow managed to come on top of the encounter. Traveling ensues. I noticed right off the bat that we weren't allowed to really talk with each other in character or out of character, and so I decided to spark up a conversation with the warlock, only to get cut off midway. This makes me sort of upset that my character connection gets cut off when he just has us rolling random encounters the whole way to Bavaria. I just realized that I've been mispronouncing that up until now. Only stopping to rest, and even then we had no chances to roleplay at all. Eventually, we make it to Barovia, and we try to settle in at a small tavern for a place to rest. There, we meet Strahd for the first time. He starts antagonizing the party, poking fun at the barbarian for being short, all sorts of stuff. This having been my first time playing, and never having read the book, I go along with it, thinking that this was the correct thing, and I offer up my services to get him to leave us alone for the night. Quote, "Hey, bloodsucker, how about this? I will give you a performance that you will never forget. If I am successful, you need to leave us alone for a bit and allow us to get our bearings in and settle down." He responds with, quote, "Sure thing, lady, but I doubt you could do such a..." Before he could even finish, I cast Enhance Ability on myself, roll a performance check with advantage that I have expertise on because she is a performer before anything else, and double nat 20'd the roll. Everyone was super excited because this meant that Strahd would leave the party for the night, but the DM wasn't super excited to see that. Strahd leaves the party alone for a while, and it allows us a chance to go off and start doing what we needed to do in order to leave. Ladies and gentlefolk, what if I told you that this wasn't the end? Somewhere through all of this, we meet what was supposed to be Strahd's one true love, and we were to guide her to the next part of where we were going to remove the curse she had on her. I'm not going to lie, I don't remember much of the actual gameplay, because our DM loved to just make stuff up as he went along. I couldn't tell you what was and wasn't true about the story we got. My bard tried to make a connection with the woman, and there was no success. What came off as a shock to everyone was that instead of the NPC being the love interest, the DM made the love interest my bard, saying that Strahd was smitten with her and was falling in love with her, despite never actually having a discussion with me out of character, or my bard in character. Over time, the favoritism started showing more and more. The DM gave me a legendary rapier that gave me a +3 to hit, and basically gave me the lucky feat for free, and he gave this to me at level 5. Followed with that, my bard got access to Tiny Hut, making it that we never had to take a watch, until the DM had made up a ruling that Tiny Hut didn't apply to Strahd, and he managed to get through in his bat form, biting onto my bard and putting a scrying spell on her that I wasn't able to make a save for. After hearing about this in the middle of combat, while he was distracting my bard from helping in the fight by pulling her away for private time, I start to get very upset. The campaign eventually comes to a close, where my bard had to agree to becoming the main wife for him in order for the rest of the party to go home, starting up a cycle of abuse for her all over again. We made the mistake of joining this DM in another campaign called Odyssey of the Dragon Lords. The ranger had left the game, and we got 2 new players instead. One of the players lived in Australia, and he and I hit it off instantly. Being from the United States, we kept making jokes with each other, and the new guy ended up bringing our group together for more out-of-character bonding, which the DM discouraged. We made up our characters, I playing a nymph bard to test the new subclass that had just come out, and the Australian playing a human cleric. At first, I wasn't down for my bard having a romantic interest, but I had opened the possibility because our characters were getting along pretty well. We had convinced the DM to let us have a play-by-post for roleplay interactions outside of the game, and he begrudgingly accepted. Cut to our characters having to face the labyrinth and taking on one of the mini-bosses of the campaign. My character is the only one not making death saves, and has to figure out the puzzle on her own, so that way the boss stops spraying fire at us. Eventually, through my own wit, the puzzle was completed, and I was given another legendary item. This time, at level 3, I was able to summon elementals twice a day. This led me in the party with raised eyebrows as to why he favored me so much, when there were 2 other girls in the party. A bit more ensues, and by the time we get back to town for the Olympics, 4 of us had dragons. The other girl in the party, playing a dryad druid, had a black dragon, the human sorcerer had a blue one, the human cleric with a gold, and myself with a red one. The DM had decided to throw a Hydra at us, a new and fresh level 4 party, hoping to give us punishment for siding with the gods, or whatever. My bard was fully ready to play support, and used my loot to summon an earth elemental in order to help with the action economy, as well as sending our baby dragons to help from afar. The Hydra only had eyes for one character the whole time, the cleric. This seemed to happen after my character kissed him on the cheek and gave him a bardic inspiration. Every single attack was at his expense, and the DM would constantly get angry when I would use my actions to heal and buff the cleric, giving him an advantage on attacks, giving him everything he would need because no one else was taking damage, despite our best efforts to get the Hydra to attack one of us instead. The fight ended when our cleric nat 20'd on his inflict wounds and rolled practically max damage, and we sent the gold and red dragon to blow fire on it, making sure he couldn't pop back up. The session ended early, due to the DM getting mad at us for taking him down so easily, and we decided to move the RP over to a bathhouse to have something lighthearted. We decided to mess with the DM a bit, and my bard and the cleric have a fade to black moment in the bath that midway would be disturbed by the DM with one of the NPCs in the module, followed by another, and another, and another. Every single one of the NPCs hit on my bard and tried to get her away from the cleric. I wasn't having any of it, so she was nice and cordial, but then one of the NPCs asked if he could buy her time, and I grew very uncomfortable with him making hints that my character was a prostitute without checking with me if that was okay. Nonetheless, the player of the cleric checked in and made sure I was okay, and we carried on. And he was starting to get mad at the DM for making comments both in and out of character about me. The final straw was in game. There was going to be a huge debate session where my character was going to have a chance to debate something with another PC and a couple of NPCs for a chance at a cash prize, the other PC being the other girl in the group. Naturally, feeling comfortable around her, we made that same joke that Sam Riegel from Critical Role made about being a master debater at each other, and the others were laughing along and having a fun time with it. A day later, our DM brings up the great debate, and I made the mistake of posting, quote, "Ah yes, it's my time to be the master debater." The DM follows up in the general chat in front of the whole party to read, quote, "I would love to watch you masturbate." I was in shock, disgust, and at the time, my now close friend who was playing the cleric was at work, so he couldn't see the blow-up that was the other members of the party yelling at him for being over 10 years my senior, married, and making me uncomfortable, and a slew of other things that are far too inappropriate for this thread. Everyone up and left the game, left the Discord, and we ended up finding a DM on Roll20 to run something for our group instead. TLDR, Creepy DM favors me and my characters over everyone else in the party, gets jealous when I make a new close friend who encouraged all of us to open communication in our party, and then tells me he would like to see me perform sexual acts on myself, causing everyone to leave the game. Well, that story went from a little bad to, whoa, WTF bad. It was already creepy enough with the DM showing blatant favoritism towards OP, and then targeting another player who she had hit it off with. But then to take an innocent joke like that, and then to say something like that, publicly mind you, is yet another cherry on top of a yet another cringe sundae. And then OP makes the mention that this DM was married, and I imagine that that marriage is not a healthy one. I am glad to hear, however, that the rest of the group managed to stick together and find a new DM. Hopefully, this one will be a little less creepy and cringe. Have you ever had a run-in with a player or DM that wanted to inject their personal erotic fantasies into a game? If so, how did you handle that situation? I'm sure your experience could help others if they ever run into someone like that. If you have a story that you would like to be read by this Doge, feel free to link it in the comments, on the channel subreddit r/DnD Doge, or even just DM me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope none of you ever run into perverted players that want to use your game to live out their perverted fantasies. Until next time.